Well, good afternoon, and we want to wake you up. But anyhow, my story started, or I guess when my parents met. They were 15 and 16 years old, and anyhow fell madly in lust with each other, and decided they wanted to live on love, and they had some pretty difficult home lives themselves. 3 of my 4 grandparents died of alcoholism, and so they had some pretty tough homes that they grew up in. But anyhow, they decided they wanted to get married, and came up with a plan, and they would tell the grandparents that they were pregnant. And back then it was a pretty big thing having children out of wedlock, and so the grandparents gladly consented and didn't, because they thought they were already, the grandparents didn't bother to tell them how to not get pregnant because they already thought they were. And anyhow, the trick was kind of on them, and within a year I came along. And then I guess they didn't figure it out, because within 3 more years there was 2 more bouncing baby boys and a miscarriage in there somewhere. And anyhow, I got the clicker, so there we go. My dad is a teenager, and we have a 22-year-old son, and he's 19 at this time, and I'm thinking how difficult his life would have been. He was a truck driver even that young, and loved riding in the big truck. And my dad at 19 decided to deal with the stress of his life by doing what his parents taught him to do. Went out drinking with his buddies, and drunken night on the town, and ended up doing something he got in trouble for and ended up having to go to prison. At 3 years old, my dad's taken out of my life, and I knew that dad did something very bad, and he wasn't worth emulating. And instead, I had my mother raising 3 bouncing baby boys by herself, and she was my hero. And anyhow, in the absence of any strong masculine influence in my life, I emulated my mother. I became a mama's boy and somewhat of a sissy. And when I got taken to daycare and preschool, the other kids would see me, and I was an easy target. They would pick on me and beat me up, call me sissy, queer, fag. And anyhow, didn't take me very long before I decided it wasn't very fun being picked on by the boys, and so I would go and hang out with the girls. And I was a little boy you would see on the playground playing hopscotch and jump rope with the girls. And the adults looking on that didn't realize there was anything wrong with it. They thought, look at little Jimmy, what a stud he is, chasing the girls already. And they didn't realize there was something wrong, that I wasn't hanging out with the boys. But anyhow, I developed attractions towards boys. I envied them and wished I could be like them. I felt inferior, stuttered. And anyhow, when we hit puberty, that envy became sexualized, and I didn't know what to do with it. I went to church, and I quickly found out what the Bible said about homosexuality, and I knew I didn't want that in my life. But reading what the Bible said didn't make the feelings go away. I became a good Bible boy, but good Christian young man. Anytime the church doors were open, I was usually there on the front pew. And I was involved in our church youth group, and we had a Bible quiz program. By the time I was 20 years old, I could recite 2/3 of the New Testament verbatim, T's crossed, I's dotted, punctuation correctly in place, King James Version, of course. I was a walking, talking Bible, and faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. But I went to church youth camp, and there I met my wife. We were 13 and 14 years old. She became my best friend, and her family moved off to Oklahoma, and we would write letters back and forth. And after a few years, God arranged it so that her family actually moved back to the town that I went to church in, and she became part of my youth group, my girlfriend. And here we are. We were the #1 Bible quiz team in our denomination. I'm in the back in the center, and she's sitting in the front there. She beat me by 5 points, but anyhow, and I was half the man that I am today, literally. And anyhow, but again, no matter how much I prayed, and I went to the altar, and I would fast 2 and 3 days a week, memorize, if I only did a little more, God would take this away, and he didn't. I was at the altars crying out, God, fix me, heal me, change me, deliver me, please, and he didn't. And and I was going to graduate high school here, or I actually just did. And anyhow, I had a bright idea for my last year in Bible quizzing. We studied 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, it says, if you burn with lust, it's better for you to marry. And so I got married, thinking getting married was going to fix me. And I was trusting God, a big leap of faith. And of course, it didn't fix me. And anyhow, married my best friend. And 5 years into our marriage, I was still struggling. The feelings and attractions intensified. They did not go away at all. And anyhow, look, my wife's puffy hair. She'd work a whole hour to get her hair to stand up like that. Oh, go ahead.
So Jim and I dated for 5 years as teenagers, and at 19 and 20 got married, and 5 years into our marriage, and we had a great marriage. We were best friends. We had a great marriage, and we desperately wanted a child. We had a miscarriage, and then I became pregnant with our son. And during my pregnancy, it was when I learned of Jim's struggle. And to kind of condense the story, he was transferred to Boston and would come home on his days off, and I noticed that his behavior had changed dramatically. And so I finally confronted him and asked him if he was having an affair with another woman. And I remember being very relieved when I found out that it wasn't indeed another woman, but it was a man. It was men in general. And he told me about his same-sex attractions. And, then in the next breath, I'm like, wow, I don't even know how to deal with that. I can compete with another woman. I don't know what to do with attractions to another man. So after our son was born, and during my pregnancy, I had the thought that as soon as I have our son, there's no way he could possibly leave our son. Even if he could leave me, he can't leave our son. And I was wrong. We lived together for 3 weeks after our son was born. And then Jim basically plunged headlong into the lifestyle and moved into his first long-term relationship. And then we eventually were divorced, and we were divorced for 6 years.
Yeah, I embraced homosexuality. I became very angry at God. I felt that God had failed me. I trusted him, and I got married, and I never thought my life would turn out like this, having a ex-wife raising our son, and I was very angry at God and the church. And anyhow, and so I was very active in homosexuality until November of '96. I had an encounter with God. I found myself in church, hadn't been in church in 7 years, and God would just target me, and during those years, he would show up at the most inopportune times when I was by myself and in the car, in the shower, in the middle of the night. I'm here and I still love you. I still want you. And I'm like, God, leave me alone. Don't you know I'm mad at you? And anyhow, I remember a verse that I learned as a kid, Romans chapter 5. Moreover, where sin abounds, God's grace does much more abound, and he pierced my heart with that. And here I'm in church, and I made my way to the altar, and I'm like, God, I'm so sorry for the mess I made of my life. Please forgive me. It was like somebody flipped on a switch. I felt clean. I'd forgotten what it felt like to feel clean. And when we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us and to cleanse us of all unrighteousness. And he cast our sin as far as the east is from the west. And there wasn't any divine transformations, but it was God's love, his wave after wave of his love. And it dawned on me I'd never felt love like that in the arms of another man. And I never wanted this moment to end. And if that meant giving up my homosexuality, I found the pearl of great price, there was nothing worth going back to. And there weren't any divine transformations, no glory clouds or anything like that. I knew it would be a walk of obedience and faith. And anyhow, I came to Oklahoma City and lived here in Oklahoma City, got involved with First Stone, and I learned that I believed a lie. There is no gay gene. There is no scientific evidence that homosexuality is genetic. And then I learned there were legitimate unmet needs that were fueling those attractions, and that God could meet me. In those initial days, I asked God, if you could do this, and you could have done this, why didn't you do this all these years ago and save us all this grief and heartache? And God immediately responded to me, surprised me. God said, because you wanted me to fix you on your terms. In the dark, our little secret. And God said, I don't work that way. It always has to be brought into the light. And anyhow, God did a pretty cool work in my life. Today I can tell you I'm not a gay man. I'm not interested in having sex with men. I've helped hundreds of men walk away from homosexuality. My wife and I did remarry. And my son was 6 there, and 6 months later we were expecting our second child, our daughter, Lacey. And tell them what Lacey means.
Lacey means something beautiful created from something that was bound and cut away. And we found that out after we had already chosen her name, and we thought how appropriate that was. And she is definitely full of praise.
And my son, God used my son to help me embrace masculinity, go back and revisit all those places that I missed growing up, and learning how to throw a ball, and all the things that were stereotypical masculinity that I missed out on. And it was a very healing relationship with my son. And this is our family today. My son's 22 and our daughter is 15.